Hey, welcome back. We have a special treat for you here today. I actually unboxed this technically live last night on YouTube, and a lot of people got to join. That video still doesn't appear to have uploaded, so I'm going to do it again. And although I've gotten to look at this, I went right to bed after, and this is basically a pretty decent unboxing. I know what to expect, of course, this time, so it'll be a little different, but this is the Brown Knives Cortex XL, and it is very heavily anticipated, and a lot of people are eagerly awaiting this, so let's get into it. First impressions, a little lighter than the Mini FSDI, a little heavier than the Cortex. Very flat feeling. There's no contour on the scales like the original Cortex. I happen to have one here, so let me show you that. Just like for like, you can see the contouring here. I'll go clip side on those scales, and just the more narrow nature here of this Cortex versus the Cortex XL. Obviously some similarities, but this is a really interesting melding of the Mini FSDI and this original Cortex, and let's get into it. Really like the flipper tab, works very well. Still more drop shot action that we've come to expect from Craig. What's in the box? Let's do that really quickly as well. So it comes with the usual certificate of authenticity. This one's Magnacut, which is the first time he's dropped a knife first in Magnacut, which is cool. Normally he does them in CPM 154 first, and then moves to a 20 CV or Magnacut as an option and charges about 50 bucks more. MSRP on this right now is $850 with the Magnacut. Be interested to see if he does some CPM 154 for 800 still, or where he goes from there. Detent feels fantastic regardless of which way you're deploying it. Feels like it was very well thought through. The lock bar works great. There is a little bit, if you go high up here, of catching. You can see the blade kind of drops onto my fingernail there. So you get a little bit of that double clutch if you don't go lower on there. That can be something that is a little nuanced versus the original. Really like that he's now terminating this fuller rather than running it all the way to the top. Certainly looks cool this way, but one of the things about that is it's kind of hard to get a purchase when you're going to do a thumb flick. And if you don't kind of go to the side, which is pretty unnatural, you'll sometimes miss. So this, by the way, is the Mini FSDI. So the inset liner lock. You can see very similar dimensions this way, but quite a bit thinner this way. I measured them yesterday, and it was about 20 to 25, maybe even 30% narrower, like for like. So we can kind of put these back to back here and take a look. Pretty significantly narrower. The scales, rather than being thicker with milling out of the inside or an inlay, depending which way you get it, you have a flat scale here. So I don't know if we've seen Craig do something like that before. I guess the original Cortex was kind of like that in a way. I don't think there's milling out of this guy. Let's take a look. Yeah, no milling. That is technically a flat scale on the inside, but contoured on the outside there. Definitely like the fuller more than the original. This one maybe had a little more bite at the top because it's cut, deeper, but it's really kind of sharp around the outside, or around the inside of that fuller. And this one just feels much better on the hand. You can miss it a little bit like I just did, but generally really good and feels fantastic on the reverse flick. It's very good. You can roll it out, no problem. So you found that sort of magical balance between having a strong enough detent and still being able to roll it out without feeling like you're getting kind of lock stuck. The lock bar itself is quite beautiful. I'm gonna zoom in here because there's some nice detail on that. You can see how it sets in there, and the detent ball is actually a little bigger than I think we've seen out of Craig in the past, so that's interesting. I remember talking to him about this because I brought some Cortexes by. He doesn't keep a lot of his knives around after he makes them, so I brought a few by for him to check out when he was designing this, and he did talk about switching up his detent ball size. So that's interesting to kind of note there. Let me grab a regular Cortex by comparison. You can see in there definitely a smaller detent ball. So that's interesting that that did make it into design. I'll just keep going here on the close-ups, and then we'll jump into some measurements. Pocket clip, a little easier in and out of the pocket. It's a little thinner than before or something. Definitely like that. And then you've got a nice smooth landing under there. You'll see inside the scales a Cortex like you did on the original Cortex, and it says XL next to it. And over here on this side, you'll see the, if I can get the lighting just right, you have a serial number. Let me grab my flashlight. Today I actually have it placed somewhere specific, so I will know where it is. Last night I was having trouble finding it. So you see the serial number, and then the M for Magnacut, and there's the XL with the Cortex. I don't know if I see anything that says made in Blaine, USA anymore. So you may have done away with that for the first time in a while. Or maybe I'm just missing it somewhere and it's a hidden Easter egg and I don't know where it is or something. No markings on the blade, which many of us love. Yeah, really loving the milling. I like it even more in person than I did in the pictures. You can see it's a very distinct vertical line now that kind of breaks through the horizontal lines. Very similar to old Mini FSD milling. I guess I should do this way, but a little more pronounced in the vertical lines versus the horizontal lines, which gives it an interesting look and effect. So this is the old button lock one, number 313, I think it is, 319 maybe. And again, definitely a thicker, different approach here. So let's measure this guy up. Give you some stats. I think the most notable things here are weight, because you've got something kind of in between some of the prior models. So I'll weigh a few of the prior models for you, and then we'll go into length and so on. All right, so it weighs in at 3.7 ounces, 3.72 exactly, versus looking at 4.23 or so here on this earlier version of the Mini FSD-i. I've weighed one of like 4.15 or so, so that one's a little heavier. Then here's the original Mini FSD, 4.195. And you have an original Cortex frame lock here, 3.095. Some of the, like here I have the prototype number 1 on the Cortex. And you'll see this micarta bolster lock version is quite light, 2.69. So definitely, I think, representing that XL kind of weight class compared to the Cortex at least, but not compared to some of the other recent knives. Let's see, I have a full-size FSD here just to compare a real XL knife from Brown Knives. This is actually prototype number 3. Which was the first time he did this pattern 1 milling, which he ended up calling pattern 1, interestingly enough, even though the first 2 Cortexes were actually pattern 2. So looking at 5.425 there. Let's measure it on length and then put it up next to some of these other knives from a size comparison perspective. I do find myself attracted to that flipper tab, which is not my usual way to deploy. I normally am big on reverse flick, but it's just under 8 inches. If you go this way, you're maybe 7.875 or so, depends how you kind of measure it. And then the blade length, 3.4 inches with just 3.1 maybe inches of cutting edge, maybe 3.125 inches there. This is the best way for the way my camera is set up to compare it from a size perspective. So, sorry, I have my computer on here to grab a little more light, so getting that turned back on. So you got the Cortex on the right here, and then the Mini FSD-i on the left, and I'm putting them pivot to pivot for size comparison here. Okay, so you can see very similar in dimensions to the Mini FSDI, maybe a tad longer, and then versus the Cortex, a bit longer on the handle, but blade's actually pretty similar, if not more cutting edge on the original Cortex, which is interesting. And then here is the Mini FSDI. Not going to see a huge difference from the Mini FSD. I'm sorry, the Mini FSD versus the Mini FSDI. Not going to see a huge difference there. Let's bring out some other popular knives. SPK Lamia, in its class, I should say, maybe not the most popular knives overall, because they're hard to get. Oz Roosevelt, but definitely knives in its sort of price range in that 700 to 900 range. So much bigger than the Oz Roosevelt and a little bigger than the SPK Lamia. See some serious differences in the design cues between those two, and then maybe some more common or popular knives. The full-size Benchmade Bug Out, and CGRB Pyrite. Two very, very popular knives that almost everyone in the knife community has handled. Maybe not just everyone, but everyone in the knife community has probably had one of these, if not both. And then we'll take this guy out. We'll bring out the Spyderco PM3. Maybe we'll call that the last comparison. Okay, so a little bigger than both of those. I think that's about good. So now I'm just going to talk about some of the things that I experienced with it so far from tip to tail. I mentioned the lock bar is probably, although it works really well, it's probably one of the downsides to me versus the prior models. I think the prior models didn't have this little piece of the lock bar that kind of swipes into the folding area. So if I were Craig, I would probably solve that somehow. We'd redesign this a little bit so that my thumb can't get that far up, and then make the lock bar a little longer or something. I don't know if that's feasible because of the way that the lock bar locks in on both sides there, but man, I think it's good lockup. Super nice. The scales are very flat, thin in hand, so although you trade off versus a Cortex, the size, like this way, they're taller by significant margin. You can see here versus this scale. Let me open it up. It's definitely much taller. The Cortex is kind of fatter, and so this thing grips in hand, in my opinion, a little more like a steak knife, almost as well as this does from a comfort perspective. This feels a little more hot spotty because it's a little flatter. Of course, it's Craig, so he's got nice chamfers around the edges and stuff, but you just have a very flat scale. So if it had a little contour on it, which you never know, maybe he'll come up with another version later with a contour. It wouldn't be hard for him. It's good. You're obviously saving weight versus a Mini FSDI, but it's not the biggest quality of this knife. Is not the grip, in my opinion, for my hand at least. Love the flipper tab. Works super well. I like it more than the original Cortex. Feels more consistent, more predictable. The detent is better than the original Cortex, a little stronger. Reverse flick is fantastic. Thumb flick is better than the Mini FSDI. So the deployment out, I feel like, is fantastic. The sounds are great. You can hear it's just got a nice little click. It doesn't have the hollowed scales, so it's a little less tingy maybe, but just very satisfying. And as it breaks in, it's just getting better and better for me here, honestly, since I unboxed it last night. You can roll it out, just great. If you want to make it even easier, go a little further down so you get a little more leverage, and it'll roll out like nothing. If you're up here, you might feel a little bit of a pop to get it out. I mentioned the pocket clip, obviously more killer milling. Interesting backspacer, quite different in design than the Mini FSD and Mini FSDI. So that's pretty different there. You can see the difference in just the size in the backspacer alone is considerable. So that's a huge part, you know, of the, and I should point out that that also is reflective in the blade stock thickness, much thinner on the blade stock thickness, which is interesting. So that's a huge, huge difference there. I mentioned I really like the kind of subtle milling on the lock bar. Very nice looking, nice little stone wash on it. Another great Brown Knives pivot there. Really like that pivot, captive. His knives are just so easy to service. This is once again adjustable. I believe, I actually haven't broken it down, but should be adjustable on the detent and like detent strength, as well as the lock bar. You can, on his other ones, make them later or earlier on the lock bar with an adjustment of a screw. You have to be very careful to only do it like 5 degrees, but it works great. What else did I observe? Talked about size, which is some of the others. Has perfect centering there, as you'd expect from Craig. He's a perfectionist. I mentioned on the other video, a lot of people don't know it, he actually hand grinds this hollow. So it's really, really thin behind the edge. Super nice. If you want to put a wicked edge on this thing, it's going to be extremely slicey. It is a nasty hollow for such a thin blade stock thickness. Jimping up here, very comfortable. Now the blade kind of goes up and then down, so there is sort of a natural placement, but for me, I'd probably want that thumb part to go out a little further, just due to my hand size or whatever. One last nuance here. You get a nice purchase here with these sort of scales kind of coming together and not quite aligned. I mentioned to Craig that I like on the Oz Roosevelt how it's kind of cut out and it fits right in there. He didn't like that on the design, I think. So he's got a rounded edge up here with his engineering mind. If you get up high though, this blade is so thin behind the edge, it's a little sharp there. If you really choke up, that's not super comfortable on the finger. It feels a little slicey. So that's, I don't know if it's something he could change or whatever, but it's worth noting, you know, along with the flat scales for things that I'm not like crazy about on the ergos, but again, it's a trade-off when you shave half an ounce off an already light full titanium knife for its size. You know, talking about a 3.4-inch blade, full titanium at 3.7 ounces, there are going to be some sacrifices. So, but interesting opportunities there as well that maybe he'll adjust on this or in the future, or maybe he won't, because, you know, it is what it is. But overall, it's 2 thumbs up. It's a nice evolution. Love the blade shape. I mean, you're talking about a killer blade shape for use. And I think it's a definite improvement on the Cortex. It's some trade-offs for, I think, a lot of people versus the Mini FSDI. Some people might like it more. I do like the look of the flipper tab a lot more than the Mini FSDI. I think that was a little bit of a faux pas on this guy. It's not terrible, but I really wish he had stuck with the original flipper tab on this, where it's just one kind of linear tab. Not 100% sure why he changed that, but it is different. So some people probably like this more. I personally like this version more. And so this one, your front flip is interesting. Like it's very, you have to pick where you do it. If you go way back here, I always feel uncomfortable. Like I'm kind of leveraging weird off the knife. So I kind of like to just almost rub along the scale there and then pull it backwards versus going way back here. You probably get it, but it's kind of weird. You can probably do it this way, but I'll probably bleed on YouTube if I do. But you can also do it that way. So yeah, really excited about this knife. Debuted Magnacut, which is really cool. Totally a new thing for Craig. He's never done before. But overall, excited about it and hope you are too. So if you enjoyed the content, please feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.